Hello. I'd like to welcome our virtual audience today to the third Fearless Conversations event, a collaboration between the Advertiser and Flinders University. It's about being brave in thinking how we can drive South Australia forward in the future and challenge ourselves to position this great state for success in the future. There will be a series of Fearless Conversations discussion panels over the next 11 weeks on topics such as high-tech innovation, tourism, infrastructure, health and more. For each, we have assembled a group of thought-provoking leaders to pose a series of questions to explore their views on the opportunities and challenges we have in relation to each topic. Today we explore medical devices and innovation and how it will influence South Australia today and in the future. Feel free to join the conversation through Twitter using the hashtag #FearlessConversations or in the comments section on advertiser.com.au. So thank you for joining Fearless Conversations. I'm Brad Crouch, the health reporter for the Advertiser, and I'll be facilitating today's discussion and encouraging our guests to be brave. Before I introduce today's panellists, I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional country of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains and pay respect to elders, past and present. We recognise and respect their cultural heritage, beliefs and relationships with the land. We acknowledge that they are of continuing importance to the Kaurna people living today. And we also extend that respect to other Aboriginal language groups and other First Nations. So, we welcome our panellists and I'll introduce them starting with my left, Dr Terry Sweeney, Chief Executive of the $200 million Digital Health Corp CRC, based at the MIT Living Lab at Lot 14. Terry is an advisor to the G20, the former Global Managing Director of IBM Healthcare, and went from selling his first startup at age 16 to selling his last to IBM for $400 million. And is in Adelaide to run the world's largest digital health cooperative, taking a slice of the $200 billion global digital health industry. Welcome, Terry.
Thank you.
Then we have Professor Trish Williams, Professor of Digital Health Systems at Flinders University and author of more than 130 medical information security and safety publications. Trish is the Director of the Flinders Digital Health Research Centre and the Cisco Flinders Digital Health Design Lab and Digital Health IoT Lab, and is a national expert on health informatics, security and medical device standards. Welcome, Trish.
Thank you.
Then we have Allison Nikula, who founded the award-winning app CareApp. This is technology that links families, carers and people in care. An occupational therapist, she was leading a team of 440 people when she was inspired to develop the app by the personal experience of her own grandparents needing a little support. Allison's family wanted to be active contributors to their care but found communication was fragmented. And in the end, we have Dr Matthew Liptak, an orthopaedic surgeon who specialises in knee and hip arthroplasty and sports injuries. He's a member of the Australian Knee Society, a prominent speaker at national and international meetings, and, as many would know, a professional footballer who played with the Adelaide Crows through the golden years of the 1990s and was a former club champion. As such, he was driven by team success. He has collaborated with the Flinders University Medical Device Partnering Program with the digital health program, the Maxm Skate, an evidence-based, TGA-approved, safe and cost-effective e-health portable at-home rehabilitation program. He's currently in the process of commercialising it and bringing it to a global stage. I'm sure anybody with a wonky knee will want to know more about this one. So welcome, team, a high-calibre team. Let's dive straight in into discussion. Now, we're living in an age what seems like an exponential rise in technology, vividly shown by the rapid development of COVID vaccines, including mRNA vaccines, which no one had heard of seemingly 5 minutes ago. So, Terry, can I start with you? It's a huge topic, but what opportunities are on the horizon that would benefit South Australia?
Yeah, I think for me, getting insights from all of the data that's available. I read something recently from a McKinsey report that says that a typical healthcare organisation only uses about 15% of the information that's within its own organisation. And I think in 2021, that's quite shocking. But we're now at a point with technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning that really, the most advanced AI now can read 800 million pages of unstructured information per minute. We've got the technology to really assimilate that information very, very quickly and drive insights for our frontline healthcare workers. So AI and machine learning is certainly something that really excites me.
Okay, when we talk about AI, it seems to be double-edged sword. It seems to be exciting, but also we're worried that machines are going to take over the world. Trish, can I ask you, are these developments job creators or destroyers for South Australia in the future?
They're definitely job creators. There's massive opportunities when you look at digital health and digital technologies, because it incorporates all sorts of other disciplines that haven't been in there before. So in addition to the clinical aspects, we need people who have computer science, information science, health informaticians. So really across the board, we need a whole range of different people and skills to be able to deliver on those.
And these are high-skilled jobs, aren't they?
They are very high-skilled jobs. And having some experience in healthcare particularly is one of those nexus that is quite difficult to get. So, we have clinicians who want to, do more technical things, like Matt. And then we have a whole, another generation of people who want to be able to do computer science and information science type of activities and have those skills. And they need to apply them in a context, and healthcare is a fantastic opportunity for those.
And this would be an area where we've gone through the pandemic where so many people were working from home, and suddenly they're realising, well, I can work from home from here on in, or I can work in my country property, or I can work out in the bush. Can we set up a community in South Australia that is providing digital healthcare and resources and opportunities worldwide?
Absolutely, I think we can, because we've already moved into that era of doing things in a very virtual environment. And so being able to translate that and have communities of practice, in healthcare, we already have a lot of those. So whether it is in the clinical field, whether it's in things like, running from the CRC or the Digital Health Agency, all of those sort of organisations really help to bring those people together. And I think there's an opportunity there for South Australia to be able to do that.
Okay. Alison, you've filled a niche that didn't exist a couple of decades ago, or not that long ago at all, with your CareApp, which links people in care with their carers, their clinicians, I believe, but most importantly, their families. So everybody's in touch. And again, this is technology that my mother's in care herself, but she's within walking distance of me. But I know other people that their loved ones are interstate, and in this era of lockdown, that's a nightmare for some people. Just explain how this sort of technology is helping the man in the street, the families in the street.
Yeah, it's a really powerful piece of technology. I mean, when we think about healthcare, one of the things that I think we need to consider is well-being. Living with purpose, living with meaning, being connected, being engaged. It's not just about meeting basic medical needs. And one of, the important parts of that is social connectedness. And we know, through the literature, the stronger a person's network of support, the better the health outcomes are. And, in this day and age, we can't all be geographically living close to one another. My family, is dispersed, not just interstate, but overseas. And using the power of technology, we can actually bring people closer together to provide that connectedness, to provide meaning, purpose, engagement, and support people to continue to live well.
I guess one hiccup with this, as I say, my mother's in care. She's got a mobile phone, but not the internet. My mother-in-law is 90. She lives at home, independent, doesn't have a mobile phone at all.
Yeah.
They're the ones who may be the missing link in the technology. How do you address that sort of thing, the problem with people who are old and just don't want to be involved in that sort of tech?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Something that we've prided ourselves on at CareApp is being ahead of the curve, but not so far ahead of the curve that it's fanciful. And we've got people using CareApp that are 85 years of age plus. And the reason that we've been able to do that is because we've worked alongside hand in hand with our users and orientated them to, probably one of the most simple user interfaces you will see. There's a big orange button, orientate the person to the big orange button, and they're away. I guess what we need to do is, be ahead of the curve, recognise that, people, their technology literacy is going to be increasing. We know that the fastest adopters of social media and the like are actually, plus 55. So I don't think we should underrate people's skills in this space. It's about holding their hand and bringing them along for the ride and demonstrating the value and what's in it for them. Make it, de-threatening it. It's not so scary.
Can I add a comment to that?
Sure.
And I think one of your first question was, a really good question about what's on the horizon. And, we have welcome to the, age of new technology. And what we have all of the ability now to be able to have devices that in the future will become, we won't see them. We have phones, we have cameras, we have voice recognition, facial recognition. And there will be a point when all of those devices become transparent to us, and they will do things for us in the way that we want them to do it. The monotonous tasks, and being able to have, instead of having to press a button to talk to somebody, that you will be able to do that by, being those things being embedded in your environment. But there's a bit of a jump for us to get to that, because we actually have a lot of that technology now. Yep. And people like the CRC are looking at, well, how do you take all that data and make it do those things? But as human beings, we often get in our own way. And I think it'll be a bit of a slow adoption of that, because change is very difficult for us. And, taking on a whole lot of technology all at once is also quite confronting for people. Sure, yeah. But when we do, it'll be a game-changing sort of thing to do, because it will just be there and it will do it for us. It's not going to take over our lives, but it will be able to have opportunities that we don't have now.
Okay, that sounds like some of the technology that we now take so much for granted, like
absolutely
TV sets.
Yep.
Go back 500 years and people would be going, oh, what's that? So I can see the opportunities there. Matthew, again, sticking with this idea, what it means for people in the street, your Maxm skate project, my understanding is is it physiotherapy at home through technology?
So it's a form of home physiotherapy that provides a self-responsible, tangible benefit for the patient to take home. And we are using digital technology and acknowledging digital technology as a form of allowing patients to do this. Just going back to, the health solutions that we're all trying to provide, we're trying to provide a connective health experience. And that connected health experience is really important for all of us to be aware that each of us can play a part in building that experience and tailoring those experiences for each of the stakeholders. And in particular, the end user, or in health, the patients. Yep. And that's what we're all trying to achieve, is some really good patient outcomes using digital technology at a cost-effective and safe environment, which is what the Maxm Skate does. It's a solution for a problem that I foresee in rehabilitation, and particularly relevant in the current environment, where going to rehabilitation or accessing physiotherapy or hydrotherapy or the normal standard care has become very difficult. And in fact, some patients do not want to access that for fear of COVID. Yep. So we can use technology to our advantage. But going back to Trish, we need to educate all the stakeholders, and that education is really paramount in building these systems.
It sounds like the pandemic may have accelerated that move. We've seen the quick growth of telehealth. Mm-hmm. As you say, people don't necessarily want to go to their health providers because they're either in lockdown or they're just worried about going out in the community. Now, as I understand it, this program, if I can dumb it down to my level a bit, I do my knee, had the operation, I'm undergoing physiotherapy, but I can use this system in my home, or take it on holidays?
Yeah, it's been coined as I can go on my rehab holiday, and basically they can see their progress on the screen with their phone, with their app, and with their smartwatch. And it allows the patient to be responsible. They get gamified, which is the term that we've all started to know and breed in digital technology. They gamify their rehabilitation. They want to get better. They can see how they're going over a period of time. Similarly, their medical supervisory team can look down upon them. And with that coordinated approach, allow the patient to get where they want to go. And it's that clinical outcome of having a good rehabilitation program following good surgery. And I've always addressed to my patients that outcomes are driven by 50% of surgical intervention and 50% of the rehabilitation. And if you get the rehabilitation right, you are well in advance. So using the Maxm Skate as one of the alternatives, and I'm not going to brand it as the sole alternative, but one of the alternatives does provide a global solution to a problem.
And the the doctor or the physio or whatever is part of the system so that they can see, well, you're not using it right or you're going off track here and
Absolutely. So there is some red flags that come back to either the physiotherapist or the medical supervisor and team that will then contact the patient and say, hey, you haven't done your exercise for 2 or 3 days. How are you going? Or you're doing well. And or on the regional patients, they can see via telehealth as well, and ring in and say, hey, let's get going. You're not quite there.
Matthew, I've got to ask you this one because I was a big fan of the Bionic Man when I was a kid. We've got an Adelaide company that's working on a Bionic Eye, which is one of the holy grails, make people see again.
Sure.
How far are we from a bionic solution or a device or technology that will have us that other holy grail where we can move wheelchairs away, not just the knee, but the spinal injury?
I think we're a long way away from that at this point in time. However, there's certainly some companies that are developing anatomical models that will help surgeons advance in the future. There's some, but to get the bionic for you or I, if we lose a limb, I think that's certainly a long way off.
Still a bit of sci-fi. Well, we work towards these things.
I think I'd just add to that, and Matt's absolutely right, and I don't know too much about eyes and sight, but we've done some work quite recently with capturing brain waves to move an artificial limb, for example. So we now have the ability to clench a fist, open a fist, turn our artificial limb by using brain waves in the same way that we can. We hooked up a radio-controlled little robot from Star Wars, which we can control in terms of moving forwards, backwards, left and right, using brain waves or the capturing of brain waves. So I think that you're right. There's a long way to go, but at a research stage at the moment, there's a lot of really exciting developments happening in that field of using our mind to control a physical device.
Is this also where the idea of big data comes in, where you've got these supercomputers and lots of data? So instead of some guy just sitting around sort of coming up with an idea and working it out on a pad, you're turbocharging the research through that digital technology?
It is, Brad. I think I read a really interesting stat the other day that of all the data that exists in the world today, not just in healthcare, but all of the information that exists in the world today, 90% of it was only created in the last 2 years. So we've got this exponential growth in information. Healthcare data doubles every 73 days. So it's this new technology that we can use to harness it and drive better decision making. And I think when we talk about decision making, using the information and the technology to derive insights from that information, it's very much a partnership between the human and the machine. I like to often refer to artificial intelligence as augmented intelligence, to get over the point that it's a useful tool, but it's a tool that will provide insights from all of that information to a human to ultimately make a decision. And I think it's that partnership between the two is an important distinction, especially when it comes to things like the ethics of AI and these new technologies.
Okay. Just obviously some terrific opportunities for people who have diseases and accidents, so forth, on the horizon, but also technology as far as improving patient safety. I understand patient safety incidents cost over $4 billion in 2017-18, and you're trialling a predictive harm algorithm in some of our major hospitals to try and reduce adverse effects. This seems another area where technology can prevent problems. Just expand on that a little bit.
It is very much that kind of prediction and prevention. So we're now able to develop models and algorithms that not only detect an adverse event when it happens, but actually be able to predict it in advance of time. So a clinician and a healthcare professional can intervene early. And we think some of the flow-on effects of that might help with things like ramping and other issues in people presenting to the ED and capacity problems in our hospitals, where if we can predict an adverse event in advance, we can intervene at the place where that person lives. Often you'll get better clinical outcomes. It's more convenient and more comfortable for the patient. But often it will reduce or eliminate the need for that person to present to a GP or an emergency department.
So this trial, I understand it's in hospitals, and it's things like patient medications, falls and so forth. Is the trial with an aim to also be in people's homes or aged care facilities?
It is. Ultimately, we're looking at it in an ED, so we're doing some work with the Royal Adelaide Hospital and Flinders Medical Centre and others. and it's actually around how we schedule our workforce to respond to a patient in need and the risk that can bring up, but ultimately also the ability to, if we're prescribing a drug in a hospital to an individual patient, let's use the technology to look at that patient's history, the drugs that they're on, the conditions that they have, to try and reduce some of those bad interactions, drug interactions and adverse events that you mentioned at the top of the question, Brad.
Okay. Alison, does your CareApp go down that path as well, sort of keep an eye on meds and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting conversation to have. So CareApp, I guess healthcare has always been retrospective, like looking at, people's, past behaviour, past health conditions. And I think we're, at a point now where we can look at healthcare in real time, which is great. And we've got, Fitbits and other sensor-based technologies that's looking at healthcare in real time, and that's really, really powerful. I guess the next step is around that predictive technology. And I guess what I'm hearing, from your conversation, Terry, around medication management and ramping, etc. I think that's really fascinating in terms of supporting, the healthcare system. What I really love about, predictive technologies is getting in early so that people can stay at home, so that people can stay, enjoying the things that they love. Ultimately, what I love about this digital health conversation is it's so person-centered. It is so about, continuing to support people who are aging, people with illness, injury, disability, to, remain at home, remain in a place that they would love to live. So, I guess CareApp is right at that cusp of, we've brought healthcare into real time, and now we're working with our partners to look at what does that look like with predictive based technology, what does that look like with integration with sensors, and ultimately with some AI.
And I think moving on from your point, in fact what you've just said too, is that we can do a lot of those things now. So, mentioning about the ramping in the hospitals, a lot of ED is clogged up with people who have chronic conditions. And we have the ability now to do a lot more monitoring, whether it's, from your Fitbit or, medical devices that you can have at home that actually help and prevent some of those admissions. And I think that's what we need to engage in more and take on more of that adoption of technology so that people can be doing that at home, and you will then have less people coming in to, to hospital. There's always the things like we have a lot more technology that is portable. So, people themselves become the point of care. So you can do blood pressure monitoring, and we have mobile ultrasounds now, and we have, maybe we'll have mobile CAT scanners, those sorts of things. And the more that you can bring that into where the patient is, and therefore for providing care when and where it's needed, rather than having them come into the hub of where we provide care, then that will change that balance of where people actually get their health care from, and hopefully alleviate the problems that we have in ED.
And I think Alison and Trish hit the nail on the head where the real time or near real time feedback from the technology to intervene or take an action. We at the CRC we're talking about the term wearables, and actually we like the term thinkables. Right now my Fitbit is great, right, and it's it can capture a lot of information. If it wants to do any kind of heavy processing on that information, it goes to the app on my phone. If it needs to do any more than that, it goes up to the cloud. It does some of that number crunching. And Brad, you mentioned supercomputers, and with quantum computing, they require a power plant's worth of electricity to do that very, very quick and intense calculation type work. But with thinkables, and there's the real push now to look at microprocessors and chips that sit on the device that are based on the neural networks of the brain, and we're calling it brain-inspired computing. So the next generation of microchips being designed on the neural networks in the brain, and the brain requires about 20 watts of electricity, which is not a lot to do all of the amazing things that we can do. If we can harness that and put it onto a chip and have the chips in these devices, then not only are we going to get real-time feedback, but we're going to get some of that predictive feedback. So if you have epilepsy and there's a danger of you having a seizure, or you're an elderly person and there's a risk of you having a fall, being able to be told in advance that this may happen so you can get to a safe place, I think is going to be a fantastic breakthrough.
So we really are talking about saving lives. Like, can you quantify that in any way? I mean, we talked about the $4 billion figure some years ago of patient incidents. Is there a sort of ballpark figure on what we could aim for, lives and money?
In terms of money, it's an interesting one. I think, the global cost of chronic disease is about $47 trillion. It's the most, when we say chronic disease, we're talking about diabetes, type 1 and type 2, hypertension, cardiometabolic diseases like heart disease, and even cancer care, $47 trillion. So the ability to use technology to take some of that cost out of the system, I think would really help. And we also think about the waste in the healthcare system as well. Globally, 30 cents in the dollar that we spend on delivering healthcare services is wasted because of duplication, error, fraud and abuse, and other reasons. So we also have the ability to drive that cost down as well. I always get a little nervous when I talk about technology saving lives, because I'm not sure I'm bold enough or fearless enough to say we're going to save lives, but ultimately it will, and we are. Absolutely.
All right. And the other thing linked to this is quality of life. Matthew, getting back to your thing, we've gone an era of elderly people benefiting particularly from hip replacements, but the knee is the big one for so many people getting to a certain age. Are we looking at a major breakthrough in quality of life with the improvements such as the technology to do your rehab?
Sure. Absolutely. There's a quality of life is improving year in, year out. And we're showing with that with the age bracket enlarging as we go along. But technology is amazing. Digital technology is expanding at such a rapid rate, and Terry's right. There's just so many platforms for this that we have to make sure, once again, I'm just going to bring it up, that each stakeholder is aware of what's going on, the education process is there. Because as we build and spend a lot of money on each of these digital platforms, we might find that it actually sounds great, looks great, but doesn't work on for the down-to-earth mum or dad or grandparent at home. And so we have to have their engagement as well. Getting back to knees itself, yes, we're developing better quality surgical outcomes all the time. But once again, is what we're developing safe, effective, as good as what we're doing before, and cost effective? And right now the health system's being inundated by many other avenues of costs, and the cost effectiveness of each of these avenues needs to be put into place. And I think that's where our current HTA, the Health Technology Assessment Group, really needs to come into play and just is aware of all these technologies and really rigorously looks at them correctly. Because as we're talking about this, we're talking about Terry's Fitbit. Currently, all of us or a lot of us wearing wellness devices, but TGA needs to get approval for those to be looked at as a medical device or medical outcome, and currently they're not. So we do need to work together with technology to expand on what we're hoping for is better clinical outcomes and being able to actually profess that they are.
All right, you've raised something which I was moving on to in the spirit of being fearless. Technology can be a real dud sometimes. We had SA Health's electronic patient record system, EPAS. It blew out by millions and millions of dollars. Years late, it was dumped halfway through introducing it to the Royal Adelaide. It's been partly salvaged, but it was a case of technology being a bit of a dud. And most importantly, clinicians didn't like it. So,
may I speak to that?
Yeah,
because I'm one of the clinicians
that didn't like it. Yep.
So one of the clinicians that was introduced when it first came out, and the Repad Hospital was one of the first hospitals that it was introduced to. Going back to the stakeholders being involved, clinicians weren't involved in the build, and as the clinicians are the primary users of that system, it was very clunky, and it actually changed our behaviour to the extent that patient care may have been at detriment. particularly in those first early years.
Yep.
If I just go back to time spent per patient, my time spent per patient was 2 to 3 times more using EPAS than using just previous technology. And think about that in healthcare costs. Think about that in patient time. Think about that with clinicians not quite understanding how to put all their notes together and potential loss of notes.
Yep.
That was occurring more and more commonly than what they would have hoped for.
Yeah.
And as they found this clinician barrier, they did find a way to make it a little bit more easy, but it's still quite a clunky system, which I still currently use at Noongar Hospital, and often find myself swearing at the screen.
Right, okay. well, Trish, could I throw that to you? How do we find the balance in technology beyond EPAS, which I think Matthew's summed it up pretty nicely, of making sure clinicians are in front of patients rather than in front of computer screens for most of their day?
EPAS is a good example in a way because, there is still a level of major IT projects that about 50% of them don't go very well or fail still. And there's a whole raft of reasons why that occurs. Matt, mentioned that the clinician's involvement. The majority of the problems start at that very early stage where things are not sort of contextualised. You don't have the right people in the room at the very beginning.
Yep.
And, we all know about project management and those sorts of things, but pulling the right people together and then saying, well, how are we going to use this in healthcare? Not, I have a product and it's absolutely fabulous and you need to use it. I first started writing medical record systems in 1986, which is a long time ago. But we had to look at how do you practice medicine and then what can we help you to do around that? Not, I have a great solution and now I'm going to give it to you and you have to change what you do. Because whilst we're okay at changing what we do, if you want to have access to your money through your bank account, you have to do it the way the bank tells you to do it or you don't have access to it. You cannot do that in healthcare. That is not the way healthcare functions. We have to do things so that it fits in with what the clinical workflow and processes already are. And that is where I think, the majority of projects fail in healthcare, especially very large ones, because we're not addressing that up front.
Yep.
And I think, Brad, Trish is right that, we embedding the technology in the workflow that the doctors and the other healthcare professionals are doing on a daily basis is critical. There's the real buzz phrase around now in digital health, putting the patient at the center of everything that we do, and we're getting good at that. But we don't talk about putting the clinician at the center of everything we do.
Yeah.
So we develop solutions in our ivory towers. So then when it hits the streets into a hospital or a primary care facility or an aged care facility, we're surprised why the professionals aren't adopting it. The other general comment I would make about EMRs, and Allscripts is no different to Cerner, is no different to Epic, and we have a patchwork of those around Australia. We can talk about why we have one in each state versus actually just having one for a population of 25 million. I did a pilot around EMR health data in China, and the pilot involved 47 million patients. So, we've got a country of 25 million. This is one of the problems I feel as an outsider coming back into Australia, is this state versus federal policy, and where, we can talk about vaccination management rollout systems where, we have Microsoft in Queensland and Victoria, and we have Salesforce in WA, and every state's paying $7, $8, $9, $10 million. Why don't we just have one for the entire country, and then we can manage it a little bit better? But I think one of the misconceptions about EMRs is it's a system of record, and I think when people get an EMR, they think it's a health data platform, and all of the insights and capability that comes with that. You don't really get that from an EMR. It's a good building block,
Right.
but it's only a building block. So I think they've been sold or they've been hyped as being something that they're probably not. So they end up being a bit underwhelming because it is just a system of record. But the smart thing is, well, now we've got that data into an EMR. What are we going to do with it? And I think that's where the value comes, not necessarily in the building block of an EMR. And I agree, EMR implementations shouldn't cost that amount of money.
Yeah. Alison, with your app, did you involve clinicians or aged care carers, that sort of thing?
Yeah, excuse me, absolutely. So CareApp is built for the people and the people who support the people. Every decision that we make, that is front and centre of our mind. And I think, Terry, like that conversation around records management and designing and clinician use, it's a really interesting one, because the end user of digital health technology are not generally the purchasers of the technology, right? So when we're designing technology, you can kind of design thinking, I'm going to design, for this provider and they will love these features because they're going to purchase, our piece of technology. And maybe that can cloud our judgment around our design decisions, because we want to create something that's going to be purchased, by the organisation, by the healthcare system, etc. When in fact, what we need to do is keep the patient at the centre, keep the client at the centre, and the people who support those people at the centre of all of our decisions. So the very first thing I did with CareApp was I invested $3.50 in CareApp, and I took a care worker out for a coffee at Chibo at Norwood. And that's how CareApp started. It was with a $3.50 cappuccino, probably $7 because I bought two, at Chibo at Norwood, with a few sketches on a piece of paper with a 70-year-old care worker, and like, what do you think? And that's how it started. And every single day I still speak with our users, whether that be family members, whether that be disability support workers, whether that be lifestyle coordinators, or what we call joy makers, the joy makers within aged care. And then of course the decision makers who, ultimately, sign the contract to use CareApp within their organisation. But the fact that, we have those conversations every single day, and when a suggestion is made, we actually ring the user back up and say, hey, thanks, your suggestion has just gone live. And so we continue those conversations. I describe CareApp as perfectly imperfect. And that's because we continue to iterate with our users and learn along the way.
Okay. Trish, we're talking about the masses of data that's out there, and there's now masses of private health information floating around somewhere out there, I'm not entirely sure. Vaccine passports are a hot button topic at the moment, but people are worried about their privacy and their medical records, having to show their medical records, or medical records possibly being in the hands of the local pub to get in. And that speaks to a wider issue. How do you balance innovation and cybersecurity in this era of digital technology?
That's an interesting question. I think there's several different facets to that. One is we obviously have legislation around, into your first point, about what you can use data for, who can use it, who can change it. And so there's a level of protection there. In healthcare particularly, all of those regulations apply to what you can do with people's health information. But there is a sort of a caveat to that, because as a person, when I'm well, I don't necessarily want people to have access to my data. I don't necessarily want it splashed on the front of the Advertiser. But when I go into emergency, I don't care who looks at my data. I want anybody who can fix me to look at it. So, the privacy types of aspects are actually quite contextual, depending on what's going on. But we do have to have an overarching framework around how do we protect people's data, because, confidentiality of data leads to privacy for the individual. And so when we look at that and we look at innovation and cybersecurity, then we need to make sure that those sort of considerations are looked at the very beginning of developing a product, and what is the consumer going to have to give that product, and what data they're going to have to give, and how is that going to be protected, and what's going to happen with that. And I think because apps are a really good example. There are over 100,000 health apps, let alone medical ones. So if you want to use an app, it gives you a screen at the front that says you need to agree to all this. 99.999% of people never read it. They go, yes, I want to use the app. Okay, all right, and which is all of us do that. But what we don't understand is what will happen with our data when it comes to that. So there's a new international standard that I've been contributing to, that looks at doing a bit like a food label for apps to say, is it reliable? Does it have quality of that particular health app? Because health apps are not regulated by the Therapeutic Goods Administration as medical devices are. And so as a consumer, you actually have no idea whether, you know, when the app says it's going to be able to help you monitor this, is it actually going to be able to do it? And I think this comes back to your conversation of there's a, you know, what happens between apps and, you know, other devices that you want to use to improve health, but they're not making a clinical decision, so they don't come under the regulations. And I think navigating that for everybody is actually quite difficult to do.
Right, I couldn't agree more with Trish, and I always get a bit of a wry smile when I think about privacy and security and sovereignty when it comes to our health information. The amount of stuff that we put on social media, you know, 500 million tweets around the world per day, over 1 billion interactions with Facebook per day, and we're putting pictures of our kids and personal in our houses and things online. We get pretty scared when it comes to health information, but you know, we look at the rollout of My Health Record. I wasn't living in Australia at the time, but looking from the outside in, you know, I think the concept you can't argue with, right? If I'm in front of my oncologist and I've just been diagnosed with stage 3 prostate cancer, do I want that doctor to have all of the information available at their fingertips to make the best possible treatment decisions for me, for my rate of survival? Of course, you can't argue with that. So the ability for that person to have access to all of that information and the care team to have access to that information, no one would argue about it. We shouldn't be having the conversations about, can this person see it, can that person see it? If you give the power to the individual, it's my information. I can determine when I tick the box for you to be able to access it and under what conditions, in what context you can access it. It's empowering the patient as a consumer. You know, I bought these jeans on 3 weeks ago on Amazon, and when we think about the patient as a consumer, it's a beautiful experience shopping on Amazon. I go in, it makes me I know it's using my information to upsell and cross-sell to me, and I kind of like that. Personally, my choice is that, and I want the ability to do that with the health system and how I interact with the health system, because we're not, the consumer is not king or queen in healthcare, and it's probably the last industry where I go to my GP, I can't even book an appointment online at my GP. So I know my appointment is at 11 o'clock. I'm still going to be sitting there at 11:45 because I've got no way of live tracking where that GP is at, so I can get some of that time back. So we accept that kind of second-rate service, you know. So I'm happy to tick the box to say use the information as long as I control that.
So in other words, that connected retail experience, you're loving. You're loving because you're not giving that information, that personal information, but you're wanting that connected health experience that we're all suggesting that we're trying to build or find a model that suits all of the stakeholders. And I think that's the really difficult part, is navigating through the regulations, as Trish said, the wishes and wants for us as developers and for the providers or the patients we're providing for. And that's a really difficult time, as we're exponentially finding that there is new innovative technologies that enable us to be able to provide, but can we provide it in a safe, cost-effective and effective way? And I think that's what we're trying to do.
I think we're at this like generational change. Like, yes, we're not the kings and queens of our healthcare experience at the moment, but I actually disagree. I think we want it. I think the appetite is absolutely there. And I certainly think about my parents who are in their 70s and still in, you know, very good shape, but they're absolutely, you know, putting all the steps in place to make sure that they're, you know, chief in charge of their aging experience and their healthcare experience. But we still have that generation before them that are accepting of that. I don't think we are though, but it's how do we go about, you know, giving people, you know, choice and control, and we don't know how to do it yet.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I'm excited about the Australian health system moving from a volume-based to value-based. You know, in the US, 50% of healthcare is value-based, and that's why there is more consumerism in healthcare in the US, whether you question the cost, 17% of GDP versus 9% in Australia for delivering healthcare services. But that value-based care, you know, who'd have thought, how do we measure how effective the delivery of that health service is, or the experience. Ask the patient. So we're now starting to see things like, we call them PROMs and PREMs, patient-reported outcomes, patient-reported experience, where we're asking the patient, how was your experience with that hospital visit or GP visit? Do you feel like you had a satisfactory outcome? And if not, you know, the financial model that sits behind that, where we see in the US, for example, where if someone's readmitted to a hospital for the same condition that they went into initially, that healthcare provider is financially penalized and they don't get the reimbursement. So I think there are ways we can incentivize the system to be much more focused on value-based care. And I think we're starting that journey in Australia, but right now it's still activity-based. I deliver a service, I get reimbursed for that, regardless of how good, bad or indifferent that service is.
And I think that, you know, to that point too, we still have quite a paternalistic view on data in healthcare. That, you know, my children are not suddenly going to turn into me when they're 40. Probably, they're probably very happy about that. But, you know, we have legislation that stops us from, you know, you can't access the healthcare data, you can't put it somewhere else, you can't do this, you can't do this with it. But, you know, as you've just mentioned, that other younger generation is quite happy to share all sorts of information. They actually don't really have that same view of it that we do. Not that they don't value it, but they don't consider it in the same way that we do. And we are using laws for, I'm going to say my generation probably, but in fact, you know, those younger generations don't look at it in the same way. And that is very slow to change.
That might change if a hacker gets hold of your information though.
Yeah, Brad, the way I answer that comment is, you know, I use Westpac and CBA banking apps on a daily basis. Could a hacker hack into my bank account and steal my money? Absolutely. Do I worry about it? I don't. So yes, we've got to have the right security in place. Absolutely, no question. But I don't think it should be a consideration for us on a daily basis.
All right. We've got a question coming from Dr. Gareth Ferber. Therapeutic relationships, the quality of relationship between the client and treating practitioner is important, particularly in mental health care. How might we make digital health tools that maximise this therapeutic factor?
Difficult one, isn't it? Yeah, no, I think that's
We're
really
all looking
difficult.
at you.
Yeah.
Well done, Matt, for taking that question.
That's right. You know, from a clinician's point of view, it's always difficult to have a relationship with your patient that is there. You're dealing with the patient's problem there and then. To have that ongoing relationship, and particularly with mental health, would be important. But to get and build those particular programs, I'm sure people are doing this. But once again, it's got to be sure that all stakeholders can see the benefits, can use the benefits, and at the right time. So going back to that predictive ability, perhaps in that field, predictive ability would be far more important than the predictive ability of an arthritic knee. Mental health is obviously at the level of, you know, survivorship in some instances.
That human relationship is still...
Oh, it's absolutely necessary. Yeah.
And it is an interesting one. And I made a comment on Twitter a few months ago, and RACGP just don't talk to me anymore. Because, you know, they were promoting, and I agree, I think, you know, that long-term relationship between clinician and patient is very important, particularly in an area like mental health. So I'm not suggesting otherwise. But we also, the flip side of that is convenience. So for me, who I don't really use the healthcare system that often, and when I do, it's much more about convenience. And if it's something maybe less trivial than a mental health consideration, I don't care whether I see my GP or someone else. For me, it's about convenience. And again, when we look at the US, you've got organizations like Walmart, you know, the giant retailer that have set up Walmart Health, and they have primary care services in the corner of their hypermarkets where I can go and see a GP, an audiologist, I can get pathology results. And it's more about convenience. And I think there's been a pushback in Australia for pharmacies and other retail health outlets increasing the services that they provide, because, as the RACGP would say with the greatest respect, It's all about having that relationship with your GP. Now, they would say that because they represent GPs. And there's a financial consideration there. They don't want to lose business. But for me, I want to be able to walk into Chemist Warehouse or wherever and see a GP in the corner of that pharmacy, like I can with CVS, with their Minute Clinic in the US. So I think from a horses for courses, definitely good to have that long-term relationship. But from a convenience point of view, I want to have a little bit more choice in healthcare and not just be kind of tied in, as it were, to the person that I've known for 15, 20 years.
Do you think that's a generational thing? So I actually, value that relationship with my GP, and maybe because I'm getting older and have more different things, dodgy knees, etc. wrong. But, my children's view of that is quite different. If they feel unwell, they don't care who they see. They just want someone to prescribe them something or whatever and have it fixed. They do not have any appetite for that relationship in the same way that I do. And so whether that will change over time is an interesting factor.
That's because they're having relationships online.
Absolutely.
They're having far more relationships online than we ever have had in our lives. And that's just changing the whole gender difference, or not gender, but the generation difference.
Yeah.
In my world, in the aged care world, I've got support workers who are going into people's homes. They've not had a relationship with their client previously, and they've got to get up to speed and build rapport really, really quickly in order to have that, deliver, the most beautiful care experience possible. And, I guess having access to, what's happening with someone, having that deeper understanding, you can go from having a transactional relationship with someone that you don't know to one that is more connected, that's more engaged, and one that you can build rapport with. So in answer to the doctor's this question, in regards to building those therapeutic relationships and ongoing relationships, ensuring that you've got, broad access to people's information, not just, what's happening med-wise or what's happening with their range of motion, but, going beyond that, what's their interest, what's their lifestyle, those kind of things.
And just going back to the clinicians, the clinicians do want to be involved with their patients and stay connected. And it might be, the telehealth or connection through that the accessibility that you're after, Terry, can be done with the person you would like to see. And offering out of the normal hours or whatever. So it is a rapport that can be built up. And these digital technology or platforms are certainly allowing that to become to the front. As I said, as a clinician stakeholder, it would be fantastic to have that available and the availability to allow my patients to come in and see, hey, it is going to be a 15-minute wait, or guess what, he can be online, and COVID's allowed the telehealth conferencing to be online. And I see that in US, actually, they've just spent another 19 million building up their platforms on telehealth as well, just in the last week or so. So we need to expand that as we're expanding digital health.
I think that Matt makes an important point about the choice. So that, again, the patient is a consumer. I'd like to choose how, when, and why I get, and where I get that interaction or treatment with the clinician. And it's back to the data, I think, Brad, that if we can't travel anywhere at the moment, we can go to Perth. If I went to Perth next week, and I don't know Perth hotels very well, I can go on to TripAdvisor or one of 1,000 websites and make an informed choice on the hotel that I choose to stay in for 2 nights in Perth. Where's the information similar in healthcare? I've just recently moved back to Adelaide. I might choose a GP out of convenience because their clinic's around the corner, but I might have a certain condition, or I might like to interact with my GP in a certain way. I need that information to make an informed choice on which physician, which GP, which hospital I choose to have an operation in, and we don't quite have that informed choice in health yet. And I think that's because it's back to the data, and we're not presented the data in a way that allows us to make that choice. So I think it feels often like a healthcare service is imposed upon us rather than actually I'm making the choice, in the same way that NDIS runs, right? So the idea behind that is, let's empower the individual to give them a care package for them to, in an informed way, to make a choice about which service they procure for their disability. We need to see that more broadly in the healthcare system.
And I think that's where virtual care is taking off, and telehealth being part of that, that it isn't just the consultation, it's about having the data, whether it's from home monitoring type stuff or from your Fitbit, you know, and us with slightly more sophisticated watches than you.
I can't afford an Apple
Terry.
Trish.
But having all that data available to help someone make those decisions. Because what we don't do very well at the moment is we do collect a lot of that data, and it's up to me to manage that. My GP at the moment actually can't cope with that. There's no, you know, intermediate, well, what do they do with that information? You know, because when you go in to see your GP, it's a moment in time. So people's blood pressure is often higher when you go and see your GP. Well, that's not the issue. Blood pressure is something that you need to be able to monitor over a long period of time to see whether there's anything going on. Yep. And I don't get that when he just takes my blood pressure when I walk in, but my watch is recording that all the time. So therefore, that is the information that you want then to be used, you know, on an ongoing basis. And we haven't quite cracked that.
And we haven't cracked it for a number of reasons. Number one is most of the watches do have some monitoring, and it's just a wellness, so they actually don't monitor it as accurate as we would like at this point of time. And the TGA at this point has recognised that, and those most of those wellness apps are still not recognised by the TGA because of their lack of accuracy at this stage. And therefore, with that lack of accuracy, we can't correctly diagnose and therefore can't correctly treat. So that's a real big problem as we move forward, that there's a lot of consumers believing that what they're seeing on their watch is actually accurate. And unfortunately, that accuracy is not quite there as yet. As we build that, it will get there. And with that accuracy, we can correctly diagnose and therefore treat from afar.
But when, you know, a lot of those, we're looking at trends, aren't we, too?
Sure.
So, you know, and I think this is where it comes, you know, there's that bit of the crux of the matter that you want to know what's happening with it over time. So even if it's not entirely accurate, if, for instance, the blood pressure is getting worse, then you would be able to sort of detect that. But at the same time, that then comes under being a medical device that then needs to be regulated and goes through all these different tests to be certified, which you can guarantee that Apple don't want to do with the watch. It's a very, you know, intensive process.
Which Maxm Scale has done and has got.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yeah.
We could say the same about COVID testing, right? Another bugbear of mine, Brad, is the cartel that is pathology in Australia, where they're holding on and protecting their income, and fair enough. But, you know,
Terry, you're being fearless.
I'm being fearless. We're going to lose all of our partners in the CRC. But you know, it's only now that we're having a serious conversation about getting lateral flow and rapid testing for COVID in Australia, when they've been doing it in the UK and the US for a long time. And it should not replace a PCR test at all, but it should be another line of defence. Yeah. You know, my mum lives in the northeast of England, and she's a little bit worried about going out. She's fully vaccinated, a little bit worried about going out to the shops. And she said, I just take my rapid flow test every day, and she's got 20 odd of them in the corner, and she just wakes up in the morning and takes one every day, and you get the result within 15 minutes. And it's not 99% accurate like a PCR test, but it's 92 or 93% accurate. And that's probably good enough to give us that indication of I'm okay or not. And we've been so slow in Australia to adopt things like that. And it's only now through the outbreak in New South Wales that we're thinking, actually, these rapid tests are probably going to be quite useful.
Okay. Just on telehealth, going back to that, I note the Women's and Children's Hospital opened a virtual ED system this month, which is, you know, if you've got a problem at 3 a.m. and it's a long drive to the Women's and Children's and you're just not quite sure, could be interesting. Do you see that being part of the changing health landscape for ED presentations, which can ease clogging, ramping and so forth?
Yeah, absolutely. We worked with the Prince Alfred through Sydney Local Health District around RPA Virtual, which I think is probably one of the initial virtual hospitals. Absolutely fantastic facility, and I think in the first 6 months they interacted with over 8,000 patients, many of who would have presented to the hospital if it wasn't for that virtual consultation. A lot of that is around telehealth, but a lot of it is around other services like remote monitoring, even digital therapeutics, right? The ability to treat someone in their own home is really, really interesting. So yeah, I think that everyone, you know, when I talk to all of the chief digital health officers around the country, everyone says, from a technology point of view, virtual care and virtual hospitals is top of the list. So I do see that it's a trend that's going to accelerate rapidly.
For sure. All right, look, I'm getting the bit of a wind up now. So seeing we're on a virtual audience, I'll thank the virtual audience for joining us. Thank Flinders for having this Fearless Conversation forum. It's been fascinating. I reckon there's a heck of a lot more I could ask all of you for quite some time to come, but I hope it's been very useful for everyone. So I'd just like to thank the panellists for sparing the time, a very high calibre panel, which we've enjoyed. Plenty of great insights in there. There'll be a story in tomorrow's Advertiser further on this, and a deep dive in the Sunday Mail this weekend, exploring some of the issues that have been raised today. So thanks to our panellists very much, and thanks to our audience for joining us. Goodbye.